Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you that will help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And today I'm interviewing Kevin Burciaga, and Kevin struggled with eating disorders for a decade before finally recovering. And in this interview, he very generously shares his story and his struggle and how he managed to recover. So it's full of lots of little nuggets that hopefully will be useful to a lot of people. In terms of trigger warnings, we do briefly talk about chewing and spitting. There's a mention in passing of fasting and purging. And we have an interesting discussion about the use of language and when we talk about saying good or bad and healthy and unhealthy when it comes to food decisions. So some people might find the language a little bit triggering or uncomfortable, so do bear that in mind. But without further ado, here's Kevin, and I hope you enjoy this interview, and I'll see you on the next video. So hi Kevin.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I think it's so important to get some male voices out there when it comes to binge eating or eating disorder recovery. So I'm really glad that you agreed to do this channel with me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
No problems at all. So I don't know whether you would like to just kick off by telling us a little bit about your story and your journey with eating disorders, because your eating disorders kind of, I say plural, because it developed over time, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. It started when I was 20, and I was in decent shape. I had a decent diet. It's not like had some really serious health problems, but I became really interested in health, nutrition, and fitness. I remember I started working at Whole Foods Market because one opened in my town, and it just became this obsession. And at first it worked okay, but then pretty soon things started to deteriorate. I lost muscle mass, I became anemic, had no energy, no sex drive. So my initial intention was to get healthier, and now my health was horrible. So I had the right intention, but I had no execution. But implementation is everything. So then this continued on for a couple of years. I was really orthorexic, and I remember one night I was working at Whole Foods. I would work the late afternoon to the evening shift, and there was this giant pile of fruit that they were going to put in the compost. I remember just like gorging on it, like just one piece of fruit after another. Fortunately, it was just fruit. It wasn't like cookies or something like that. But this was like a weekly habit. But then I would go home and say, okay, it's okay. But then after a couple of years, I started to chew and spit my food. And that's when things got serious, because it's like, okay, this is not typical, but it just became this instant habit. That went on for another year, and then that progressed to binge fast, binge purge, and then sometimes it was just binge eating. And so that initial decision to modify my diet when I was 20 affected me all the way into my early 30s. So that is my story in about 2 minutes.
Wow, right. So I suppose the question that a lot of people will be wondering is how did you get out? What changed for you that you were able to get to a better place with food? Because that's a long time.
Yeah.
That's many years of a really difficult time with food.
Yeah, I think the reason why it took that long is because I kept doing a lot of things that didn't necessarily matter. For example, focusing on weight and not the behavior, focusing on the diet, not the behavior, thinking that tomorrow was going to be different, next month is going to be different, next semester is going to be different. When I have this, then it will be different. I kept thinking that it was going to be easier in the future and that I could delay that process. And eventually I got to my early 30s, 30, 31. I thought it's not going to be much different. So if I can't change now, I'm never going to change. It was a painful realization. And I'm sorry it took me that long to reach that point, that it took me 10 years to finally figure that out, that my circumstances weren't going to solve it. My environment wasn't going to solve it. Nothing or nobody was going to come into my life and change everything. I was the problem and I was the solution. And
Mm.
that was always true.
And was that a light bulb moment for you? Can you remember the moment when you realized that, or was it more of a slow burn?
Yeah, I would say slow burn for sure. I wish I could say woke up one day and had this, epiphany, and I just had this incredible revelation. The sky opened up and showed me the truth. It wasn't like that at all. It was kind of this slow realization that now was the time, and I had to make this change now, and I had to let go of this habit that was destroying my life, but it was also comforting in a way. And saying goodbye for the last time was really, really difficult. And that's why I kept delaying that process, because I just couldn't let it go.
Hmm. I suppose it's that trap, isn't it, of thinking that I'll start tomorrow, I'll start tomorrow. And I think a lot of people end up in that trap. And it's interesting because you describe it as being around a decade. Is that right?
Yeah, because the initial so my when I was 20, I decided to go pesco vegetarian. So no red meat, not a lot of dairy, and then just fish. But then it was like nothing but vegetables, nothing but fruits, very little whole grains. I wasn't even eating potatoes at that point. So if you want to go back to the point where I first showed signs of disordered eating, so age 21, to the sign that I finally started eating right, it's like 31, 32. So yeah, we're talking about a decade.
Hmm. And so, because it started off very restrictive, orthorexia, but
Mhm.
then came those times that you're describing, the binging, and those times of losing control. So, like, do you remember that time, like, where your control basically crumbled and suddenly you're out of control with food? Is that what it felt like?
Now that I can trace back to a single point. I do remember my first episode of chewing and spitting. It was these chocolate, of all things, these chocolate peanut butter like protein bars or something. Those are supposed to be healthy, I guess, in a way, because they have a little more protein, vitamins. But I remember just sitting there, it was like this whole box, and I would just chew it, spit it, chew it, spit it, chew it, spit it. I remember that one episode. I remember thinking it was this unreal experience. It's like, this is really weird. Like, it felt amazing, but it was also shocking
Hmm.
because I was orthorexic up until that point, and I had all of this control, and now here I am chewing and spitting just mountains of food. So
Hmm.
I didn't know what to do about it. I was like, is this okay? Is this temporary? Is this going to go away? I wish I had taken action then, because the chewing and spitting was like the gateway drug. It started there and then it progressed.
Hmm.
So I think I had a chance to to how do I say, to crush that behavior, and I didn't. And then I spent the next 10 years trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Did people in your life know what was going on? Did you talk to anybody about what was happening?
No, never. The thing about an ED or any kind of disordered eating habit is that you learn how to hide it really well. And I think that's something that a lot of disordered eaters do, is that they learn how to hide the evidence. So they always do it alone. They throw everything away. They take food and then they replace it. Um, it's almost like you learn how to be a liar in a way, because you don't want anybody to know about it, because it is kind of shocking. Um, but the other thing too is that you're always thinking, well, this isn't going to last much longer. This isn't going to last much longer, so I can do it on my own. And so when you think that recovery is right around the corner, or it's always around the corner,
Yeah,
um, there's no reason to tell anybody. It's like, why should I tell anybody when I'm not going to do this after this week
of
or
course.
next month? So it's like,
Yeah.
because it's going to disappear at that point, and I don't want to tell anybody.
So when you realized then, when you came to that realization that recovery wasn't coming, wasn't going to come to you,
Yeah.
what did you do next? Like, how did you start?
I started focusing on everyday decisions instead of trying to change everything at once. That's what I kept thinking for many years, that I could just set a date and then all of those thoughts, all of those urges would just disappear in one night. and that I could completely transform myself in one night. That is like playing the lottery. You're probably not going to win. You're assuming that all of this change is going to happen one day. So I started focusing on those daily decisions. Like, do I eat this or do I not? Is this something that's in line with my goals, or is it not? Is this who I want to be, or is it not? Do I need to go for seconds? Do I need to have this snack? All of that adds up over time. And so I realized that the change is going to take weeks, if not months, to complete. So I stopped that really bad habit of setting a date and then expecting everything to change on that date.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting, because I 100% agree. Like, it's all the little decisions that need to change, not the one big decision to recover. But I'm thinking that with a mind that struggled with disordered eating, how do you learn how to trust yourself with those decisions in the moment? So when you're saying to yourself, like, should I have seconds? How do you assess whether it's restrictive or not when your relationship with food has been so off balance?
Yeah, well, that takes time. And for years, I ate for any reason except hunger. So it did take me time to learn, to trust myself, to connect with those hunger cues, because I was so used to exceeding that satiation level. I didn't know what it was like to eat based on hunger. It's like, I'm like, what do you mean eating based on hunger? It's like, I eat for every other reason. The thing is, I had a lot of knowledge and information about healthy diet. And I think that's true for a lot of disordered eaters. I think they know too much for their own good. They've tried this diet, they've done that diet, they've read all of these books, they have all this information, but they don't know how to implement any of it. And they're the ones who are, binging or purging or whatever. It's almost like they would be better off not knowing any of that. So I knew what a healthy diet looked like. I knew about macros. I knew how to set up a healthy meal plan, but the execution was a lot harder, eating mindfully, eating balanced portions. So I knew what the ideal outcome was, but it did take time for me to eat just strictly off of hunger. It was not an overnight process.
Yeah. And were there any resources for you at the time? Were there any books that you read or stories that you heard, or was this something that you feel that you did all on your own?
No, I definitely read a lot about it. I never went through formal therapy. I saw I guess she was a psychologist. This is early, 2009, 2010. Just keep in mind, back then, you didn't have a binge eating coach on YouTube like we have now. Like, I couldn't just go on YouTube and find you, for example, and we didn't have this like global network of therapists. Things were a lot different. And I remember going to a counselor, and it helped a little bit. Kind of, she helped me flesh out some of these thoughts and ideas that I had, but I think I only saw her for a couple of months. I did read a lot about neuroscience and addiction and why we become addicted to this. Looked at some religious texts on that. Couple books that stand out. One of them was The Willpower Instinct by
I know that.
McGonigal.
Yeah.
I love everything that she writes. She's if you haven't read her, she's a Stanford psychologist. So that's another one. She just came out with one on the benefits of exercise. Another one was Brain Over Binge. That helped me understand kind of like how these habits form, and the destructive effects of dieting, and how dieting and restriction can lead to this kind of behavior. So that was really illuminating. But it wasn't like I read one book and thought, oh, this is the answer. Everything I have to know is in this one book. It was trial and error, my own experimentation, plus everything that I was reading and learning.
Yeah. So when you look at your own eating disorders, then, to you, do you think that they were habits? Is that how you would describe what your eating disorders were?
I think they were really powerful habits. I mean, I hesitate to use the word addiction, but in many ways it was. It helped me cope with uncomfortable feelings, uncomfortable emotions. It helped me cope with dissatisfaction. But the thing about about EDs is that they do provide that instant gratification. And I think for me, I was I was overestimating the short-term value and underestimating the long-term consequences of it. It's like, it's okay, one more time, one more time, one more time. Well, one more time turns into 100
Yeah.
pretty soon. And then you've lost months, if not years, of time.
Mhm. So what was, and this is a really broad question, but like what was the emotional journey like for you then? In terms of, was there emotional work? You don't need to go right into what it was, but was there emotional work that you had to do and feelings that you had to confront in order to be able to recover? Or was the habit changing enough?
I think at first there were some emotional factors. So when I was 21, socially isolated, I was anybody that I knew in high school, I didn't know in college. They kind of went their own different direction. Didn't have any friends in college, which is unusual when you're in college. Usually that's the time when you make all these friends. Um, and then there was the insecurity, didn't know where I was going. I don't know what my goals were when I was 21. I was just aimless. I think a lot of young adults feel that way. And I didn't feel like I was good at anything. So that was part of the problem. So you combine all of that, and it's a combustible mix, and
Mm-hmm.
that led to the behavior. When I was in my mid-20s, I had a better social network. I was in grad school. I met a lot of people there. I had goals. I knew where I was going, but I still had the habit. So I think a lot of the causes of it, the isolation and the insecurity, it started it. But once the habit started, didn't matter that I it didn't matter that I felt better and that I had a better social network and that I had a better environment. The habit was there and it was running. So it didn't matter if I had better self-esteem or goals in life or a better body image. The habit was like it had already started and it had so much momentum.
Mm-hmm.
It was really hard to stop.
Yeah. So it started for you then like a coping mechanism, but just became like maladaptive. By then, like the habits and the patterns have taken over, and like a healthy relationship with food, kind of even remembering what that was like, I imagine is quite a challenge. How do you feel about food today? Not asking what you eat today, but how do you feel in your food choices and your interactions with food?
I'm a lot more agnostic about food these days. I don't say this is good, this is bad, I should never have this, and I don't demonize food the way I used to. And I I believe there is room for entertainment in your diet. We just had a barbecue here the other day. It was not 100% healthy, but it's entertainment. It's fun. Like we had a cake. Um, when I was 21, 22, I probably wouldn't have done that. I probably would have been a lot stricter. I don't obsess about it as much anymore. I'm not trying to chase the perfect diet. I don't have the time for that anymore. I try to do the best I can, and I make modifications here and there, but it is not my goal every day to eat the perfect diet and hit my macros, as they say. I have better things to do.
Yeah. And since recovering, have you spoken to many other men that have had eating disorders or are still struggling with eating disorders?
I've spoken to a few men, um, but not as much as I want. Uh, so I hope that if I share my message enough and on enough platforms that I can attract them, because I know they're out there. This can strike anybody. It doesn't matter if you're male, female, 20, 30, 40. Okay, I don't think we should just assume that this only affects young females who do gymnastics. That's not true at all. Um, with the amount of advertising and processed food that we have today and this impulsive society that we live in, I think we're going to see more and more of it. So I'm surprised that more men have not connected with me, but that is part of my mission, to connect with men who have these disorders.
Yeah. And I think that's a really worthwhile mission to have, 100%. Um, And so if somebody had got to the point like you did, where they realized, okay, I'm not going to be able to just transform overnight, no matter how much I keep telling myself I can. I recognize it's going to take small steps and changing my behavior. But like, I don't know where to start. What advice would you give to somebody in that position where they're willing to take these little steps, but they don't even know what little step they can take?
Focus on those small decisions and just ask yourself this: what's something that I could do today that I didn't do yesterday? Analyze what you ate yesterday. Is there some substitution that you can make? I'm sure if you think hard enough, probably not that long, you can make one more good decision today than you made yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of changing everything in that one night, why don't you tell yourself that today is day one of a 90-day process?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably going to take at least 90 days to create the changes that I want. When you do that, you give yourself forgiveness, because then you understand that challenges are part of the process and that you're not going to get it right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So don't see it as a 1-day change, see it as a 90-day change.
Yeah. And when you say good decision, I feel like for me, like when you say good decision, I'm like, well, then there's bad decisions. And that to me pulls me back into the moralizing, all or nothing thinking, this idea of we have to make good decisions. Like, how does that tie in with not moralizing food choices?
Yeah. You could say healthy, unhealthy, preferred, less preferred, if you want. Because, yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap. Oh, today was a bad day. It's like, oh, today was a good day. Well, why was it a bad day? Oh, because I ate something bad. So it's easy to categorize all these decisions into good and bad. But for example, let's just say you wake up and the first thing you do is check your phone. Okay, is that a bad thing? Maybe. But if you see an email that causes you distress the minute you wake up, maybe you don't need to check your phone the first thing in the morning. Maybe you can wait 30 or 60 minutes and have some quiet time.
Yeah.
And if that's all you did, that's improvement,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because now you're reclaiming your time. It's probably good for your mental health too. That's what I mean about these small decisions every day. It doesn't even have to be food related. It can be anything. So if you're not meditating or if you're not taking quiet time each day, why don't you just start with 5 or 10 minutes? Start there.
And I think and I'm so glad that I got you to clarify that, because I think what we end up in here is like a bit of a tussle over language and what language means. So I often use the phrase, make a decision that serves your highest good. So sometimes like a decision that serves your highest good might be an ice cream in the park. And other days it won't be, just like depending on how you're feeling and whether that decision feels compulsive or like the reasons. I think the intention behind a decision is far more, to some degree, it holds a lot more weight than the decision itself, even though the decision itself is important too.
Yeah, well, it depends on context, I think. And when we say good and bad, it's just we're so used to using that language, and it is easy to overuse it because it's easy, right? That's good, that's bad. Like that's healthy, that's unhealthy. And it's just, I think the human mind likes these strict categories where we can just put things into neat little compartments. Oh, he's Democrat, he's Republican, blue and red. That sort of mentality. It's easy, but I like how you say that. Is this decision serving me? And if let's just say you're eating a bunch of ice cream in the middle of the night and then you're purging it, that's probably not serving you. Whereas if you go to a birthday party on a hot summer day and you have an ice cream cone, that probably is serving you.
Yeah.
Even though it's the exact same nutrition, exact same macros, it's not good or bad. It just depends on the context. And like you said, the reason that you're doing it.
Yeah, 100%. And there was something I heard you say in an interview that I thought was really great, and it was simple, but when when I heard it, it just really made me stop and think. And that idea that what we do today affects tomorrow. I think those were your words. And I think with the binge eating mentality, it's so easy to kind of go, well, I'm going to binge today because it's a clean slate tomorrow. But
Mm-hmm.
like the binging today, like that impact, you're going to wake up, I guess, the next day. And this is what I'm taking from what you said. You're going to wake up the next day feeling groggy, maybe a headache, your mood's going to be lower, and then you're going to be more inclined to reach for things that are not going to like help you in the long run.
Yeah, think about this. My decision to restrict when I was 21 is directly impacted my decision to binge when I was 30. Okay, that's a difference of 9 years. But had I not restricted when I was 21, I would have never binged when I was 30. So it's really easy to discount the long-term impact that these daily decisions have. And like you said, if you binge today, it's only going to be harder to not do it tomorrow because you've done the habit one more time. And the thing we know about habits is that the more times you do it, the stronger it gets.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this delusion in a sense. Well, tomorrow it'll be easier. No, it won't, because if you do it today, it's only going to make it harder to stop tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. And you use the word delusion. Like that's how I used to feel. Like every day I would feel like I deluded myself again because I was so convinced. So I sometimes talk about it as in like asking the question, like, what makes you think that you can do tomorrow what you can't do today? And that
Yeah,
idea
and
we can only take responsibility in the here and now. We can't take responsibility for tomorrow yet. And that's what I love about your message. It's the here and now, the only
yes.
place where we really have choice.
Yeah, the greatest predictor of your behavior tomorrow is your behavior today. So just keep that in mind. It's probably not going to radically change unless you take action and you understand what your values are and you start making decisions based on those values. So you need to start taking these daily decisions more seriously because they could have long-term impact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the miscalculation that a lot of disordered eaters make, is that they think it's not that bad and it won't affect the future. Well, if you do it long enough, it will. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying this to scare anybody, but that's just how our brains are. It's like our brain is hardwired for the here and now, and it discounts the long term.
Yeah. 100%. What is it they say? You overestimate what you can do in a day and underestimate what you can do in a year.
Yeah, I've heard variations of it, but that's a good mentality. It's showing up consistently every day for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you get the results. You don't just show up one day and get the results that you want. It's
Yeah.
not how it works. It's the small decisions over time. It's that compound interest.
Mm-hmm.
But
Which I
when
think,
yeah.
go
Yeah, it's just when you've been doing it for so long and now you have to say no when you're used to saying yes and you don't get any reward, it's really easy to go back and say, forget it. I'm just going to keep doing it.
yeah. Yeah. And so what did you, in your experience, when you felt like that in those moments, there must have been times when you felt like that. How did you like reset your intention or reset yourself so that you could continue moving in the direction you wanted to?
I reminded myself that it's not going to be easier if I go back. If I go back, then I'm going to undo some of the progress. I don't want to go back to that. There was nothing good about my disorders. Nothing at all. Other than the instant gratification, it ruined other areas of my life. My social life, my relationship with my family, my health, my self-confidence. It's like, do I want to go back to that? Let's just keep going. And eventually those habits and those urges will die. And the other thing too is connecting with my values. It's like, is eating this whole box of cereal, is this really what I want to do? Is this really who I want to be? But it was contradicting my identity. I wanted to be a healthy specimen. I didn't want to be eating all this unnecessary processed food. it was just that mental conflict that I didn't want to deal with anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wanted to be one person, and I was doing this, and it was too much.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very wise words indeed. You know, I think a lot of what you said today is incredibly important. And I'm convinced there'll be people watching this who needed to hear exactly what it is that you've shared. So just want to thank you for coming on and being willing to be so open with your experience.
Thanks for inviting me.
No problems at all. Thanks, Kevin. Bye-bye.
Bye.